Our next set of species spotted in Australia are also parrots, and have a number of physical similarities with the true parrots, such as the zygodactyl foot with 2 claws front and back, the characteristic curved beak with the mobile upper bill, as well as their harsh vocalizations and general high intelligence. One of the most immediately notable differences between cockatoos and the Old World true parrots is the lack of the specific micro and nanostructures resulting in the vibrant blue-greens, commonly seen in the latter group. Consequently, most cockatoo coloration is pigmentary in origin rather than structural, and colours are therefore generally restricted to reds, yellows, blacks or browns, derived from carotenoids and melanins. Some species will also use exotically coloured patches of skin as part of their coloration, and this little corella is a fine example of such, with its blue eye rings. The little corella is among the smallest of the cockatoos, but they still display the second major characteristic of the group, which is the incredibly mobile and expressive head crest. This crest is present in all species of cockatoo, and in both genders, although in particularly dimorphic cockatoos, the males is generally either larger or more brightly coloured, and occasionally both. The crests are erected whenever the birds are particularly excited, as well as generally whenever the cockatoo is landing from a significant flight. The little corella is also notable for the sheer size of its flocks, which may be up to several thousand. Sulphur-crested cockatoos are quite a lot larger than little corellas, and weighing somewhere between 2 and 3 times as much, at up to 1 kilogram. Besides this though, as their name implies, a notable characteristic of the species is its bright yellow, sulphur-coloured head crest. During our time in Australia, we were able to positively identify having seen 2 of the 4 subspecies of sulphur-crested cockatoo, namely the Matthews cockatoo in the north, which can be distinguished from the other subspecies by the pale blue eye ring that it has in common with the little corella, with whom much of its range overlaps. In the south, we observed the greater sulphur-crested cockatoo, which, as the name implies, is the largest of the 4 subspecies, although is otherwise generally slightly less remarkable, in that it has shorter crest feathers than the other subspecies, and the underwing and tail are notably less yellow. Whenever a flock is feeding on the ground, one or more individuals may be found high up in a tree, preferably dead to avoid obstruction, keeping watch for predators. This behaviour is so well known, and has been for such a long time, that it has entered common slang in Australia. Someone standing guard watching for sudden police raids on illegal gambling gatherings is referred to as a cockatoo, or cocky for short. One particularly notable individual we observed was this one in Adelaide. We were initially concerned that this cockatoo had contracted cytosine beak and feather disease, which causes, among other things, deformity of the beak. However, as it seemed to be showing no other symptoms, such as deformation of the claws and malformation of the feathers, it seems more likely that this is simply a bite malformation, similar to what might be seen in humans. What is most striking, however, is that there was another cockatoo nearby that persisted in feeding and grooming this individual, as it did not seem to be able to do so itself effectively. The galah is one of the most colourful cockatoos, and is also one of the most widespread across Australia, occupying practically every region with the exception of the driest areas and the far north of Cape York Peninsula. The galah have a number of significant characteristics, among the more notable but less visible of which is their flight speed of up to 70 kilometers an hour. Like many other species of cockatoo, and indeed many Old World parrots, there is relatively little dimorphism between the sexes, although it is possible to tell them apart if you stare deeply into their eyes. The irises of the male galahs are very dark brown, almost black, while the females have a lighter brown or red iris. As has been previously noted, the galah will be found in mixed flocks with the little corella and the sulphur-crested cockatoo on occasion, and they will also be found alongside Major Mitchell's cockatoo, who are visually quite similar. And the galah can readily hybridize with all of these species. It is possible that this breeding success, along with the more or less obligatory human activity at this stage, are primarily responsible for how widespread the galah is today. Environmental changes driven by European settlement, which have been disastrous for so many species, have been incredibly beneficial for the galah, as deforestation for crops to be grown results in ground similar enough to their preferred feeding areas that they are able to adapt readily. Although the species itself is not immune to criticisms of disruptive and destructive behaviour, bored individuals in the wild have been observed stripping bark or leaves off trees, and when they form flocks of up to 1,000 individuals, they can outright kill trees through defoliation and have been observed doing so. Our next spot, and one of the largest and commensurately loudest, is the red-tailed black cockatoo. At around 60 centimetres in length, they are nearly 25 centimetres longer than galahs, and weighing up to 920 grams, they are about 2.5 times heavier as well. Unusually among cockatoos, they are strongly sexually dimorphic, and the individuals shown here are an adult male and a juvenile, which closely resembles the coloration of the female. While it is difficult to tell the juveniles and females apart, it is possible, although we had a little help in this, as we were able to observe both parents interacting with the juvenile before the female departed. The females also have spots in various regions of their feathers, most notably around the head and face, and although these are generally pale in colour, some individuals and populations can also show them fading into a much more red tone. These individuals were all of the subspecies referred to as the great-billed cockatoo, and were all spotted around Darwin in northern Australia. And to say that we were excited to have observed a breeding family would be quite the understatement. However, much like the sulphur-crested cockatoos we observed around Adelaide, we soon became, if not sick and tired of their presence, certainly we did become a little jaded. As I'm sure you can tell by this point, their calls are, shall we say, distinctive, with a volume, pitch and tone which, from an individual bird, borders on the unpleasant. When you come across a group of more than a dozen individuals who appear to all be adult or subadult males, displaying to one another to establish their pecking order, the charm of the species does wane quite rapidly. Our final cockatoo spot in Australia came unexpectedly in Sydney. The first individual we spotted was fairly well hidden by foliage, and so we weren't able to tell exactly what it was, and assumed based on the visible portion of the tail that it was a juvenile red-tailed cockatoo. Thankfully, it wasn't long before this individual was joined by others in the flock, and we were able to get a better look and identify them as yellow-tailed black cockatoos. The yellow-tailed black cockatoo is slightly larger than the red-tail, about 5 centimetres longer, but not notably heavier. And despite being from different genera, red-tailed and yellow-tailed black cockatoos are in fact able to hybridize, although this appears to have only been observed twice and in captivity, rather than in the wild. The offspring appeared to have traits of both species, with a tail very similar to that of the red-tailed species, while also retaining the yellow ear coverts. Where the red-tailed cockatoo often fares quite poorly in areas disrupted by human activity, the yellowtail tends to do quite well. Unlike the red-tail, which is predominantly seed and grain eating, the yellowtail has a much broader diet and includes the kernels and parasites of pine trees. As many pine groves were planted and managed by humans around the major port cities of Australia, the yellow-tailed black cockatoos found a more abundant, readily accessible, and reliable food source. The flock we were able to observe around Sydney seemed particularly comfortable around humans, which for our purposes was an absolute blessing, as we were afforded a far closer look at their incredibly dexterous beaks than we'd managed to achieve in nearly 5 weeks of filming across the rest of Australia.